The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and something else, something sharp that made the other species wrinkle their various sensory organs in distaste. In the corner bed, partially hidden behind a privacy screen that nobody had bothered to close properly, lay Tekla. She was dying. Everyone knew it. The station's medical staff had made their assessment 3 cycles ago. A degenerative cellular breakdown, they said, common among her species after prolonged exposure to the recycled atmosphere of deep space stations. Treatable if caught early. Fatal if neglected. Tekla had been neglected. For 5 standard years, she had scrubbed the floors of Sector 7, cleaned the waste processors, and sanitized the communal eating areas. Her species, the Velen, were small, barely reaching the chest height of most humans. Their skin held a faint blue luminescence that dimmed when they were ill. Tekla's glow had faded to almost nothing. The station administrator, a Korthax named Brel, had already processed the replacement order. Velen were cheap labor, easily replaced. The contract holders rarely asked questions about mortality rates. She's no use now, Brel had told his assistant. Move her to the medical bay until she expires. Don't waste resources on treatment. The medical staff, a mixture of species from across the coalition, had nodded. They had critically ill patients who could actually be saved. A dying servant wasn't a priority. Tekla lay in her bed, conscious but weak. Her large eyes, dark as deep water, stared at the ceiling panels. She had no family on the station. Her contract had been sold twice. The second buyer had worked her to exhaustion, ignored the early symptoms, and now she was here alone. The night shift brought different faces to the medical bay. Most of the staff were Korthax or Pelin, species that valued efficiency over sentiment. They checked vital signs, administered basic palliative care, and moved on. Then the human arrived. His name was David. He worked in hydroponics, managing the plant systems that provided fresh food for the station's premium residents. Nobody had requested his presence in the medical bay. Nobody had asked him to come. He simply appeared one evening, carrying a small chair. The nurse on duty, a Pelin named Shri, watched with confusion as David set the chair beside Tekla's bed and sat down. "Can I help you?" Shri asked, her translator rendering her clicks and whistles into standard. "No, thank you," David replied. "I'm just visiting." "You know this patient?" "Not yet." Shri's facial tendrils twitched in confusion, but she returned to her duties. Humans were odd. Everyone knew this. They formed attachments to things randomly, cried over fictional stories, and kept non-sentient animals as companions. If this one wanted to waste his rest period sitting beside a dying Velen, that was his choice. David didn't speak at first. He just sat, reading something on his datapad, occasionally glancing at Tekla. Her breathing was shallow, labored. The medical monitor above her bed showed declining numbers after an hour. He left. He returned the next night and the night after that. On the 4th night, Tekla finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. "Why are you here?" David looked up from his reading. "Someone should be. I am no one. You're someone to me." Tekla's eyes closed. She didn't have the strength to argue with human logic. David started bringing things. A small music player that emitted soft sounds, what he called rainfall and ocean waves. A blanket from his quarters, because the medical bay kept the temperature optimized for Korthax comfort, which meant too cold for everyone else. A small plant in a pot, something green with tiny white flowers. From the hydroponics bay, he explained, setting it on the small table beside her bed. "I thought you might like something living nearby." The other patients noticed. A Korthax with a broken limb, healing in the bed across the way, asked his nurse about the human. "He comes every night," the nurse explained. "Sits with the Velen. Why?" "I don't know." I asked him once. He said nobody should die alone. She's a servant, a low-contract worker. The nurse had no response to that. Among Korthax, such sentimentality was incomprehensible. But David kept coming. He began talking to Tekla, telling her about his day. The tomato plants that were producing exceptionally well. The algae tanks that needed rebalancing. The way light hit the observation windows during station morning. Tekla listened. At first, because she had no choice, trapped in a failing body. But gradually, something changed. She began to wait for him. Her dim eyes would turn toward the door during evening hours, watching for his arrival. On the 9th night, David brought soup. Real soup, made from vegetables and protein cultures, seasoned with herbs from the hydroponics bay. I don't know what Velen usually eat, he admitted, but this is pretty mild. Want to try? Tekla hadn't had real food in days. The medical bay provided nutrition through an 4-line. The smell of the soup made something ache in her chest. David helped her sit up, supporting her shoulders with surprising gentleness for his species. Humans were strong. Everyone knew. They came from a high-gravity world. But they could also be careful. She managed 3 spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her. That's good, David said. Tomorrow we'll try for 4. The medical staff noticed the change. Tekla's decline had slowed. Not stopped, the damage was too extensive for that. But slowed. The human is feeding her, Nurse Shri reported to the head physician. Let him, the physician said. It makes no difference to the outcome. But it did make a difference. Tekla began speaking more. She told David about her home world, a place she hadn't seen in 8 years. About water that fell from the sky in warm drops. About bioluminescent forests that glowed in colors humans couldn't perceive. David listened. He asked questions. He remembered her answers. Why do you care? Tekla asked one night, the question that had haunted her since his first visit. David was quiet for a moment. When I first came to this station, I was alone. New to space, new to working with other species. I got sick, nothing serious, but I ended up in this same medical bay. I was scared. Everything was strange. And a Velen cleaning worker, not you, someone else, she stopped and asked if I needed anything. Brought me water. Checked on me during her shifts. He paused. She didn't have to. I was nobody to her. But she saw someone who needed kindness, and she gave it. I never forgot that. Tekla's eyes glistened. We are taught to serve. Maybe, David said. But kindness is a choice, not a service. She chose it. I'm choosing it now. Word spread through the station's working population. A human sitting vigil over a dying Velen. Some thought it foolish. Others found it curious. But among the lower-tier workers, the servants and laborers and those under contract, something shifted. They began visiting. A Pelin custodian brought a small token from his culture, a smooth stone meant to ease passing. A Korthax kitchen worker, going against his species' usual indifference, left a package of sweetened grain cakes that Velen could digest. Even a Drex merchant, notorious for harsh business practices, stopped by and left a data chip containing music from Tekla's home world. The medical bay staff watched in amazement as Tekla's corner filled with small offerings, tokens of recognition from beings who had never spoken to her when she was well. David orchestrated it all, not through command, but through example. He had shown them something fundamental, something that their diverse species had forgotten in the efficiency-driven void of space. That every life mattered, that dignity wasn't earned through status. That in the end, connection was what separated existence from living. Tekla grew weaker, but she was no longer alone. David still came every night, reading to her now because her eyes were too tired. Stories from Earth, tales of forests and oceans, and the strange, resilient humans who inhabited them. On the 23rd night, Tekla's breathing changed. The monitors chimed softly, alerting the staff. David held her hand, a gesture he had learned she found comforting. "Thank you," Tekla whispered. "For seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," David replied. She died as station night became station morning, her bioluminescence flaring once, briefly. In a final moment of radiance, David sat with her for another hour. The funeral was small, but unprecedented. Station protocol didn't include services for contract workers. They were simply recycled, their biological matter returned to the station's resource systems. But David filed a formal request, backed by signatures from 47 station workers across 12 species. They demanded proper recognition. Administrator Brell, facing what might become a labor issue, reluctantly agreed. They held the service in the observation deck. David spoke, his words translated into 17 languages. He talked about Tekla not as a servant, but as a person. Someone who had dreams, memories, preferences. Someone who had mattered. The gathered workers listened. Some wept, those whose species could. Others stood in silence, their version of respect. After, the station seemed different. Workers greeted each other in corridors. The harsh efficiency that had governed interactions softened slightly. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a shift, and in the hydroponics bay, David tended a new section. A small memorial garden, growing plants from a dozen worlds, including a luminescent vine from the Velen home world. Beneath it, a simple plaque, Tekla. She was someone. Human fiction celebrated their warriors, their explorers, their great minds. But perhaps their true strength lay elsewhere, in the stubborn refusal to accept that any life was worthless, in the quiet act of